So it all began here for me. I started volunteering in this prison. And one of the secrets I'll tell you is when I started working here, I was not only afraid of what the culture clashes might be in prison, but I was really afraid to speak in front of large groups. And so I learned how to be comfortable in front of audiences talking to murderers and lifers and long-termers and stuff. So I'm only a little bit nervous talking to you all. So we've been hearing a lot about different kinds of culture clashes. And this prison that we worked in, we started at, this had the dubious distinction of being the largest maximum security women's prison in the world at the time. And it was twice the capacity it was designed for. It was holding more than 4,000 women inmates at the time. And even though you could see all the clashes that you can imagine on the surface, the gang rivalries and the ethnic and racial tensions and the officers, the inmates, all of that was there. But to me, that was just what was on the surface. The real culture clash that I'm going to talk about simmered underneath that. So I want to share with you a little bit of what I've had the opportunity and privilege to experience doing work for 13 years in prisons, men's and women's prisons. And it's been a life-changing thing for me to volunteer in prison, which I never expected. So people ask me, what do we do there? And we've heard a lot of things today about how the importance, what we really need in the world is to bridge these culture clashes and these gaps and this illusion that we are different than each other because of outer things. And so what I found in prison was indeed in our hearts, in our feelings, deep inside of us, we are all the same. And that's what keeps our volunteers coming back year after year after year. That's why we have waiting lists for our volunteer teams. And I'm going to share just a little bit of what that's like with you today. So to me, the primary culture clash in prison in this country is the clash between two different ideas of what prison should be. Is it punishment or is it rehabilitation? So let's look at where we've gotten with the punishment model. In the United States, we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population in the land of the free. And in this past year, we've been seeing tremendous media attention on this point, which is great that this is coming to light. And people like President Obama and Pope Francis, they visited US prisons this year, and they called for second chances. Not only that, but lawmakers across the country are saying, what we're doing is not working, and it's really expensive. And if you think about it, what is the point of a prison anyway? Isn't it to help people change whatever they've been doing and return to society as more peaceful individuals? Because most of them are going to get out. They're going to join us back in our communities. So the Freedom to Choose Project. People say, well, what am I free to choose exactly? And the most simple way I can describe it is we support people in learning the inner skills so that they can choose peace over violence. Now that's a tall order, right? But we do it in a really unusual way. Now, like many entrepreneurs, we didn't really understand what we were doing when we got started. We just had this calling, and we responded to that. We did the best that we could, and then we just kept building on what worked. So part of our model that we've been told is very different is we take a large team of people, 80+ volunteers, and rather than telling inmates what they need to do to fix their lives, we present a set of skills, some of which are just communication skills that help us relate with each other, and some of which are really, really profound, life-changing skills, like learning how, when you get angry, how to authentically come back into peace and calm, how to make a more responsible choice. I don't know about you, but that seems to be a human issue, not just a prison issue. Certainly, I work with my corporate clients all the time with the same kinds of things. So our volunteers are amazing because they show up and they're going to sit with 2 inmates in different exercises throughout a 2-day experience. And they share about their own lives. They share about their joys, their sorrows, their challenges, and all along they're practicing, they're modeling the skills that we're teaching. And then the inmates, I don't actually like to call them that, but it's expedient, they get a chance to talk about their lives. And many of them say it is the first time that they had a clear space to speak about what has happened to them, what they've done without judgment. So we all come in with a value system that says people are worthy of respect, they deserve dignity, and we're going to treat everyone as best we can with unconditional positive regard. So when we first started working in the prisons, my husband and I were doing our doctorates in psychology, and his research involved learning about the mirror neuron system. Now, this was right at the beginning of all of that research, which has become a lot more commonly known. And so we had this lens. Here we had this classroom, which was the size of a gymnasium with 200 or more inmates and 80 volunteers. And we were all practicing together. We were humans together. It leveled the playing fields. And we were able to look at what was happening through this lens of the mirror neuron system, which is a neurological explanation of how we connect through empathy, of how we feel each other's emotions. And so in a prison, if you think about it, a lot of the role models for inmates are other inmates, because there's a real separation between the people who reside there and the staff. And that is the current design in the United States. And so when our volunteers come with compassion, the inmates, they model the compassion. They get to actually support what they call a free world person in getting through their challenges and their problems. Their self-esteem rises immediately. Many report that it is the first time that they feel like, oh my God, I helped another human being. And so they're touched very deeply. One story from a man who had taken the workshop many times. Well, maybe it was 3 or 4 times. We started working in the men's prison. And he came up to me on a break, and he said, I want to tell you a little bit about my story. He told me that when he was 8 years old, he watched his father kill his mother. He'd seen the knife on the counter, and he blamed himself because he didn't take the knife away from his dad when he flew into a drunken rage. Then at age 11, he was molested, and by the time he was 16, he was involved with the gangs and he'd taken a life. He said, I just want you to understand where I've come from so you can understand the importance of what I'm about to tell you. He said, working with you all in these workshops, I've come to experience an emotion I thought I was incapable of feeling, and that's love. And so let's think about that. Why is that so important? So many of the men and women in prison, they feel defective. They feel bad. They even call themselves monsters. So when somebody feels like that about themselves, what kind of choices do you think that they're going to make? So we help them find that caring human being inside. We reflect that to them so that they can come to see themselves as worthwhile, as capable of love and compassion, as expressing love and compassion, so that when they go to make choices, it comes from that place inside, gives them a whole different set of options. And that journey from feeling like a bad person to a caring and worthwhile person does not happen just because somebody steps outside of the prison gates. It's a journey. So this is one of the experiential classrooms that we set up in the men's prison. And you can tell who the volunteers are because they're not wearing blue. And one of the other components that's really important that is been brought to light by recent research is, well, let me step back for a moment. So in my view, part of the culture of our punishment system in this country has been a shaming environment in the prisons. You've done something wrong, you should be ashamed of yourself, you're a bad person. This is how most inmates feel. And the interesting thing in criminal justice research, they've found relatively recently that shame actually backfires for a lot of people. It doesn't work because it's so painful that people tend to become more violent, they use drugs and alcohol, and it leads to reoffense. And so these same researchers found they define the difference between what they call shame and guilt. So shame is, I feel bad about who I am. There's something wrong with me. I'm defective. When somebody feels deeply ashamed, that's their self-identity. But when somebody feels guilty in the way they define it, they feel bad about what they did, which is different than who they are. And so the way I relate to that is, it seems like what's working in our program is we help people, we give them skills to help them resolve some of their shame, discover the worthwhile person inside, and then simultaneously take responsibility for their choices and learn how to make more responsible choices. And this may sound like a strange thing, but we have a lot of fun in the process. I mean, it's an amazing thing to walk into a room where it's all different colors and walks of life and our team and their team, and we all come together as humans. We even have a simultaneous Spanish language translation section so that we can include everybody who wants to participate. So this has tremendous implications for prison culture. Let me tell you another story. So we started working, as I said, in the women's prison with lifers and long-termers. And in prison, very often, the lifers and the long-termers, they call the shots among the inmate population. They actually call them the shot callers. So if you can shift what happens in that population, it's a real leverage point in a prison situation. So when we started there were only 2 self-help programs. That's inmates helping inmates in a 4,000 person prison. So these women, when they came to our workshops, they started to learn things like how to talk to each other, how to treat each other better. They started to work together and cooperate. And they took their differences that had been conflictual and they started to see the beauty in them and working together. So they bloomed the self-help populations, the self-help programs, to over 25 in about 2 years. And by the time we completed our work at that prison, 8 years, we'd heard there was actually a culture shift among the inmate population. Now, I work in culture shift in corporate America too. That's a challenging thing. I was amazed that that could happen. And so it was things like that, stories like that, that inspired us to create a nonprofit. And I really feel so hopeful and optimistic about what's possible in our future, because we are recognizing as a society that the punishment model doesn't work. And so we're starting to turn our eyes to look at these new ventures that are showing amazing results. Oops, wrong direction. So this is preliminary research from our program. And we haven't published yet, but it's exciting because it shows us the possibility of what I think is really on the future. Now, it's going to take time to shift the cultures of prisons in our country. Of course it will. But I've seen what's possible when people who really care show up and they say, let's all just be humans together and let's learn how to do that better. Let's learn how to be the best people that we can be. So there are countries in the world that are beginning to experiment with this with great results. And that shift that we're talking about takes place inside each one of us. So will we be judgmental with ourselves when we do something we don't like? Or will we be kind and look for the learning opportunity? As one woman said to me, one of the women in prison, she said, what you can do inside yourself really has the power to change the world. Thank you.